You're listening to
Catholic Sprouts,
the daily podcast for Catholic kids that strives to plant seeds of faith. Hey there, Sprouts. Today is Thursday, October 11th, 2018. This week on the Catholic Sprouts podcast, we have been talking about Jesus Christ. We have been trying to understand him and his nature. On Monday, we talked about how Jesus is the absolute center of everything that we believe and practice in our Catholic faith. Tuesday, we talked about how Jesus was fully God, how he existed at the beginning of time and exists now because he is God. Yesterday, we talked about how he's not only God, but he was also fully human while he lived on this earth, and how he experienced nearly every single thing that we experienced as humans. Today, we're going to talk about what Jesus did while he was on this earth. We are going to talk about his mission. Now, to understand a lot of the things that Jesus preached, we also need to understand what the Jewish people believed when Jesus walked onto the scene. Now, the fundamental thing that Jesus preached was the coming of God's kingdom. The Jewish people at the time had been waiting and looking for the coming of God's kingdom, but they had some wrong ideas about what this meant. First of all, they thought it was a place. They also thought that the Messiah would come and he would be a warrior king, almost like King David, and that he would battle their enemies, their oppressors. Because remember, at the time, the Jews were occupied, meaning they were controlled and governed and pushed around by the Roman Empire. So they thought that the Messiah would come as an emperor king and throw their oppressors over, defeat them, and establish his kingdom on earth through them. They also thought that the kingdom of God was not open to everyone. They thought that people who were sinners, especially well-known public sinners, like tax collectors, that they would not be welcome in the kingdom of God. They also believed that people who were foreign, people who were not part of the Jewish nation, would not be welcome in the kingdom of God. Well, Jesus showed up on the scene, and after his baptism by John the Baptist in the Jordan, his mission on earth began. He began to preach, but he also, through his lifestyle and his words, began to turn all of these wrong ideas on their heads. First of all, he identified with sinners. He ate in their houses. He called them to follow him. But even more importantly, he completely changed the idea of what the kingdom of God is. Jesus taught us that the kingdom of God is not necessarily a place. It is simply the fulfillment of all that God has promised, all that he taught us in the Old Testament, and all that he obligated us to do. So, for example, Jesus took many old teachings from the Old Testament and took them one step further, or fulfilled their actual obligation that they were calling us to. For example, in the Old Testament, Moses wrote that we should love our neighbors and hate our enemies. But Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, said that he gives us an even more perfect law, and that is that we should love our enemies as well. Therefore, the kingdom of God is not a place, but Jesus taught us the kingdom of God is anywhere where people are trying to serve God and to live out his perfect rules as best they can, where they're going above and beyond to answer God's call to love and forgiveness. And so, Sprouts, here is your challenge today. I want you to remember this idea that the kingdom of God is not a place, it's simply people doing the work of God with complete love. So look around either your home or your classroom, and I want you to say inside your own heart, I want you to say, this is the kingdom of God when I do God's work. This is the kingdom of God when I do God's work. And this is your environment. This is where you can truly live out God's or Jesus's even more perfect rules that he is calling us to. And I want you to make it a silent but constant mission to make your environment truly the kingdom of God. That's it for Catholic Sprouts today. We'll be back tomorrow, but until then, continue to grow in your faith and truly sprout into the beautiful creation that God intended you to be. And finally, a quick note to the grown-ups. First of all, thank you for listening to the Catholic Sprouts podcast. I ask that you please consider sharing this podcast with another Catholic family you know. Send them an email, a text, or simply mention it the next time you see them. Please join me in the mission of helping each Catholic child truly sprout into the wonderful human that God created them to be.